Okay, here we go, DHCP. Number 2. So last week we dove into DHCP on Windows Server. So assuming you guys got that done, going into Ubuntu going into DHCP on Linux won't be too terribly different. So the cool thing about this is that DHCP on Linux is pretty much DHCP on Linux no matter which one you go to. So the configuration itself will be the same. If you do this configuration in Red Hat or CentOS or Fedora, you'll probably have to deal a little bit with what is there? SE Linux, that's what it's called. In Ubuntu, it's AppArmor, and I think in OpenSUSE, it's SE Linux as well. So just kind of tying that back to what you guys just went through with the whole Linux course and everything. But we're dealing with Ubuntu, so it should be smooth sailing from start to finish, so long as you don't typo. That's the biggest thing. You're going to find out pretty quickly that when you are in Linux and you are configuring the things that you've just got done configuring in Windows, the biggest thing that you're going to run into is making sure that everything is typed correctly. You're going to see here in just a minute when I get Ubuntu installed and everything that it becomes a huge factor. If you make a single typo, it can bring the whole thing down. So, but there are ways to take a look at that. If you do make a typo, there are ways to find out that you made a typo or what it is that you need to be looking at to fix your issues, and we'll get there too. So, hang tight. Fire up your pfSense machine, and let's start installing Linux. So I'm going to start that first because it'll take a couple minutes, and then from there we'll run through all of the lab stuff. So Ubuntu server, name it whatever you want to. I don't care about this. This is more already exists. Oh, that's probably true. Yeah, that one's for Linux. Okay, so I'll just name it something different. How about, let's just call it Ubuntu Serve. So unique. You could probably get by with 1 gig of RAM. I don't think. Oh, no. I actually specifically say 2. So throw 2. And what do I say there? 30. Just so you can't blindly follow me. Read the instructions. All right. Fire that guy up. Ooh, actually, you know what? So I'm going to add the ISO, but I'm going to kill it because what I want to do is make this network change here. So not NAT. I want it to be on my internal network, same as the Windows ones on the Windows side, but for the Linux machines, of course, on the Linux side. So actually, here I'm gonna cheese it. So we're gonna start that machine pause. Yeah, before it actually boots up, and then I can make this change. Now it's gonna be kind of funny if I break it by doing this, but I don't think I will. I've had pretty good luck doing this stuff in the past. So anyway, so long story short, to avoid what I'm having to do right here, just make sure that when you create the VM itself, you don't immediately start it, and you go into the network and make sure that it's on the Lin side of the network. And assuming you went through and did the test last week, or I'm sorry, not last week, 2 weeks ago, when you were setting up the network, that you move your Windows machine to the Linux side as well to make sure to test that. And as long as it worked, obviously, everything should be golden here. Because what we're going to do is recall the IP addressing information that you already had and apply that statically. So we want Ubuntu server to have a static IP address just like your Windows machine. And yeah, you gotta know what IP addressing information and all that you set to make that actually happen. So I'll show you what to do when we get there. So I want to run through the installation real quick like. And we're using 1804, not 2004. So if you're just blindly going to the Ubuntu website and you click just download, server, whatever, you're going to get 2004. I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. I just know that you're not exactly on what I'm on. So if you have issues, it's going to be unique to 2004, I would imagine. But then again, we'll see. So the thing here is this is a living installer. You can update to the newest version of the installer. But again, just to kind of everybody's going to see this, we can do continue without updating. Now, who would have thought? Installers are software too, and that software can have bugs. The idea behind that is that, they'll work out bugs, and you can, no matter which version of Ubuntu that you get, 18 or 20, you'll be on the same installer. So it'll be consistent across all of your different installs. Anyway, English, obviously. But here, so I know that everything's working, right? Take a look. You can see DHCP v4, 172.16.200, 101. So I'm actually working. Everything is good. However, according to the lab, it wants me to use, just like last week, wants me to use the second IP address in the range. So we need to come in here to ENP0S3. So if you remember from last semester, that is typically what most modern Linux distributions will name its very first network controller. So yeah, this is just the network card we need to configure. So IPv6, not too worried about it, but IPv4, that's really what we want. So going in here, automatic is not what we want. As a server, we want it to be the same all the time, every time, and never have a chance of changing. Now, typically, it will not change, but yeah, we're in that situation now where 99% of the time it won't change, but that 1%, we cannot have that 1%. So, the Linux installer is a little weird. I don't know why. Instead of just asking for the typical, your IP address, your subnet mask, your whatever, I believe this is asking for the actual network address. So not subnet mask, but actual subnet definition. So in this case, 172.200, right? No, what else? Pretty sure. Pretty sure. Oops. 16.200.0/24. Pretty sure. If you get it wrong, it will argue with you. You'll get some red text and it'll tell you, hey, I'm not looking for that. So be aware. Keep an eye open for that. I think .2 is what I wanted. 1, gateway, router, default gateway, whatever you want to call it. That's what that is. And then name servers. Also .1. And then search domains. We'll configure this later, the search domain, so don't worry too much about it. And you can test the network connectivity here in just a minute. Yep. Everything seems okay. No need for proxy address. This is if you have a server set up on your router or a separate server that does internet filtering or something like that. Typically, unless you set it up and know about it, you don't need one. So mirrors, this is obviously where you go and get your updates. So you want that. You can leave that alone. There are lots and lots of mirrors if you'd like, but no need to change any of that here. And then here, I'm not too terribly worried about how you're setting it up. Most VPSs just set it up just like this, use an entire disk. So if you're going out to DigitalOcean or Amazon Web Services or Microsoft Azure or something like that, and you spin up a new VM and you're running some kind of application on it, what you're getting is this very top option. So it's going to be what you encounter the most if you're dealing with cloud services of any kind. So we can just hit enter on that. Enter on this one. It's asking which disk. There's only one, so not really much of a choice. And then it's just double checking. Are you sure? We're going to set up, if you look down at the bottom here. So on this disk, we're going to set up one partition for grub, and we're going to set up one partition for all the other stuff. Sound good? Cool. Done. And continue. So set up all of your stuff. This is going to be an account that does have sudo access. So, I mean, you guys should remember this from last semester, but just as a refresh. That's the deal. We'll call it something simple like that. And do me a password. Cool. Done. Actually, I've always had issues with this. I think it actually might be the version of the installer. So if we updated the installer, this might actually work. But every time I've checked this box, it just never worked. So I'm going to leave it off. But we're going to install OpenSSH later on anyway. It's going to be part of the lab. Actually, yeah, there'll be a bit of the lab that actually has you go and install OpenSSH server, so we can access it from our Linux Mint machine that we'll be installing in a little bit. But for now, we can leave it off. You know, if you feel like it, you can always install it and just let me know if it actually works. These are really easy ways to install some application. Nextcloud is like Google Drive. If you want to set one of those up for yourself, you got a spare laptop with a terabyte hard drive in it or something like that, you can set that up and you know, literally just check that box, click done, and it'll work. Cool thing is, yeah, like I said, it's pretty much just Google Drive, but self-rolled. So if you like that kind of thing, you can roll one yourself. And tons of different things that you can install, but that's not really what we're concerned about here. So done. And we'll let it finish. So while we're letting it finish, we can talk a little bit more about what I'm looking for in this lab. Just trying to situate this stuff so that it is a little more timely, so you're not stuck here sitting watching a video waiting for something to install. Anyway, because most of the time I don't really edit these at all. They're just live as live. Anyway, that's the deal. So DHCP server, we're going to be taking this away from pfSense. This is why we will need a Linux Mint machine here in just a minute, so we can actually do that, right? If you remember, pfSense is configured via the web interface and not any other way. So we've got to well, actually, I take that back. With DHCP, you can do this without using the web interface, but we need to get that all set up anyway, because there are things that we cannot do outside of the web interface. So anyhow, use Ubuntu 18.04 server edition. You don't need the desktop, especially if you're running low on RAM in the first place. Using the desktop is going to eat up a whole gig of RAM that you don't need to be giving out. But anyway, you're going to need your pfSense VM. You're going to need a new Linux Mint, Linux Mint VM. Consider 2 vCPUs. Don't worry too much about it. If you can't spare it, you can't spare it. I understand that. Minimum system requirements, I mean, use a gig of RAM. Give it about 30 gigs of hard disk space. So on Ubuntu 18.04, if you cannot spare it, you cannot spare it. Again, note it, though. If you are going to deviate from this, as in less than this, if you go more than this, I don't care. But if you go less than this, you need to note it in the PDF that you submit to me, right? Because everybody's submitting PDF. I will add that to the bottom of the thing here. PDF. Moodle chokes on just about everything else. So send me a PDF. Anyway, so 2 vCPUs, especially if you can spare it, 2 gigs of RAM, and a 30 gig disk. That'll allow us to install all the cool goodies that we're going to be doing throughout the semester. And then obviously put it on the Linux internal network so it feeds through, or it uses pfSense to access the internet. Here are your ISOs. So go get Linux Mint 19. I think this is 19.3. Yep. The latest Linux Mint. And Ubuntu 18 server. Oop, yep, that's just straight up the download. So when you do a Linux Mint, just choose one of these, any of these. James Madison University usually saturates my bandwidth. We'll put it that way. Never have any trouble downloading from there. It's always fast. Anyway, if for some reason the video doesn't do it justice, you can check out... Oh, come on. There it goes. Got to use the keyboard. You can go to this particular link, and you can kind of step through what you need, what the installer is going to look like, what kind of keys you can use, blah, 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 right? All that kind of good stuff. You can find additional help right there. Ubuntu's actually got some pretty decent tutorials, pretty decent documentation. There is no substitute for Red Hat documentation, though. Those guys are fantastic. So the gist of the entire lab is written out for you. There's really nothing that you need to do that isn't noted here, but we're going to go through pretty much all of this anyway. The biggest thing is you guys are already going to know these, LSBLK, you're going to know host name, how to find your IP address, how to set your time zone. This is really where the new stuff starts. ISC DHCP server. Don't fret. This is really just the way that Linux calls its server. It is the official ISC group. Let me see. I forget. I forget the name. Oh, the Internet Systems Consortium. That's right. These guys have been around for forever, and yeah, that's what they do. They do DHCP, the de facto standard. Oops. Anyway, so that is what it is. So it is literally called that. Anyway, so install it using apt install, right? ISC DHCP server, and that's pretty much it. So take a screenshot of that. I'll go through it. Oh, it's getting updates. Of course it is. That's all right. It's probably best for everybody. So it is going through some updates, downloading some stuff, and installing it. I'm just going to let it keep going. But that's kind of the deal. Now, here is really where we start getting going. You want to match this information here with... Trying to open up a new tab for that. It didn't work. Anyway, you want to match this with the documentation that I've got right here. So again, Ubuntu documentation kind of reminds you how to do this. The difference here, apt versus apt-get, same thing though. Here's the dhcpd.com configuration file, and here are the options that I'm talking about. So when you see something, where is it? When you see something in here like this, and you're not sure where it is, you're not sure where to go, or any of that kind of fun stuff, check the documentation first. There's a good chance, and we're talking like 99.999% chance here, that what I'm talking about here that doesn't make sense is already noted in the official Ubuntu documentation. So I don't have notes for you guys in this semester, mostly because why would I write them when there's official notes or official documentation on the website that of the distribution that we're using. So anyway, this is kind of the deal. You'll start and end pretty much right here. Oh wow, this is super old. Certainly there's a newer one now that I'm looking at it. But this is the basic stuff. This is how you're going to want to set it up. Anyway, once this is done, whenever that may be. It looks like it's actually installing it now, so we should be good. Should be good here in just a couple of minutes. But anyhow, that's how we'll do it. So the whole idea is that we're doing this server the same way that we did the Windows server. So when you create what in Windows was called a scope, you call in Linux a subnet declaration. So when you're setting that up, you want to use the same range as pfSense. So in my case, that was, I started at 100, I think, and went to 199. So I'm going to use that in my subnet declaration there. Default lease time. So what any particular person is going to get is, I think, what did I say, 1 day or something like that. I don't think I'd say how long. Oh, wow. I can't even read my own stuff. Yeah, set it to 1 day. And max lease time to 1 day. So, turns out you can actually request longer than whatever the default lease time is. And this way, no matter what, you're going to get 1 day. So default lease time is if you don't ask, we're going to give you 1 day. Max lease time, if you do ask, we cannot give you anything longer than 1 day. So, and then set the router option is obviously pfSense. Set that to pfSense, and then set the domain name servers option. This should also be pfSense. We haven't set up a DNS server just yet outside of pfSense. And then take a screenshot of the entire subnet declaration. So once you get all that done, the unwritten subtext here is just as you did with the Windows Server, DHCP on pfSense needs to be off. So using your Linux Mint VM, log into pfSense and turn it off, just as you did in Windows. You can do this really kind of anytime, to be honest. It doesn't really matter too terribly much. But if you turn off DHCP before you get into Linux Mint, you will obviously not get an IP address, so you'll need a static one for yourself until DHCP server on Ubuntu is configured. So be aware of that. Right? With no DHCP, you don't get any IP addresses, so you need a static if that's the case. Then here, this is going to be the same thing as when you went into the DHCP snap-in and looked at leases. You should see at least one machine, and this is the same idea, except in Linux, with no GUI, you can't just clickety-click all the way into your leases. They are stored here, var lib dhcp dhcpd.leases. So you can cat that file. Honestly, cat or less or more, something that just lets you view the file instead of edit it. If you edit this file, leases will break. So be aware, you don't want to edit this file. This file is dynamically created by the system itself, by ISC DHCP. So no need to configure it. Just look at it. And then immediately after, give me a date. That way I can kind of verify what your lease is, what the date is, when the lease is going to end and all that. And I'm just looking for agreeance on that. All right. So, yeah, I was going to say the fans have cooled down. So I'm going to assume it's done, and it was. So reboot. All right, so just remember Ubuntu tends to kick out the disk for you. Notice it's gray now. So it will just boot back up. So there's no need to go in and scramble to try and take the disk out in time for it to reboot right or whatever. It just does it for you. Now for Linux Mint, we installed it last semester, or I'm sorry, 2 semesters ago. So if you are unfamiliar, head to this link and it will show you how to do it. It mentions that you boot into a live session, you just click on the little install on the CD and just next, right? Here is the way that you install it. If you need help, most of you, I suspect, will not. The installer is quite literally a next kind of thing. All right. Cool. So now that we're here, I would absolutely recommend that you install all updates now. It did install some of the unattended stuff, so like the newest kernel and all that kind of fun stuff. But it doesn't install all of the packages during that automatic update session that we just kind of waited on a little while ago. So do a sudo apt update and sudo apt upgrade, reboot, and then you can get started on this. I'm going to ignore it mostly in the interest of time. But anyway, so LSBLK, what I'm looking for here is the way that everything is installed. I just want to make sure that it is installed and then you've got the right size disk. This way I don't have to worry about looking at the VirtualBox stuff, or at least verifying what you've got in VirtualBox with what you've got in the system itself. Host name, I mean, it doesn't have to be the most unique thing in the world, but it certainly, well, no, you have to pick it anyway, so there's no way around it. So host name, I'm just looking to see what you have named your machine. And then I like color, so -C is color. Yes, I typed A, not address. That's also fine. Gives you the same thing. Just verifying the IP address. It did run the updates a little while ago, so I'm going to assume we have internet, but you probably want to test that anyway, just to be sure. I'm not grading you on this, but, oops. There we go. But if Command C, or I'm sorry, Control C, by the way, if you want to stop something like that. But yeah, just give it a test. Just make sure, because if you run into this whole like temporarily cannot resolve something whenever you're doing apt anything, that's usually what it turns out to be. So if you're getting errors like that during an apt whatever, then it's probably just internet issues. So make sure that you do have internet before you start running all kinds of things. So configuring time zones using time.date.ctl. Here's really where the help file is going to come in handy. So if you just type in time.date.ctl, it's going to give you what it is. And we are not Eastern time. So if you look, it's got me, let me see, local time, universal, RTC, and then time zone. Notice, time zone. Yeah. We're not UTC. So we're going to be 6 hours off. We need to change that. So time.date.ctl, help. And you can get an idea of how to set time zone. So if you go down a little further on that help, you can see under commands, you see status, set time zone, list time zones. So a couple things that you need. Number one, list time zones. You really don't need this, but just to see how many there are is like a ton, right? So what you're looking for is, if you remember from, or if you do the Linux Mint installation, you'll know, America Chicago. So those in Illinois, whatever, tend to keep the same time as we do. So America Chicago is what you want. So if you notice on the left-hand side over here, that's Cayman, Chicago. That's what we want. So capital A America / capital C Chicago. That's what we're looking for. All right. So the reason you want that is list time zones goes to set. I think it is. Time zone. This is where the tab comes in handy, right? If you forget in the middle of typing it, but you know it's like time Z, it'll finish it out for you, time zone. And then if you do another tab, it reminds you that there are 426 time zones. Do you want it to display them all? And you can. It literally will do that if you hit Y on that. But really what you want here is just to type out the time zone itself. Okay. Time.date.ctl again. And notice, 5 hours off. Only 5 hours off. Notice now under time zone, we have the right time zone. The reason that you want this is actually super important. The reason that you want to set your time zone is anytime you get an error, it's going to have a timestamp on it. And if you leave the time to UTC, then it will always be 5 hours off. And unless you are really good at snap conversions, just being able to convert right there on the spot and knowing what time it is in UTC versus what time it is here, you'll never have any clue as to what time anything went wrong. So when you go back and you're like, well, I know yesterday it failed, but it came back up, but then it failed again, and it came back up, and then you go back and look at the log and you find where it failed, you'd have no clue when that actually was. So this is why we want to set the time zone. Make sure the time zone is correct. That way, everything in the log happened exactly when you think it happened. So anyway, so now that we got time and everything else configured up, we can install the DHCP server. So it's going to let you know we're going to install this line here. We're going to install the DHCP server and a couple other packages that it depends on. So you really can't get around any of this stuff. You have to install those packages. So telling it yes will do. So stopwatch says DHCP server on Ubuntu installed faster than it did on Windows. That's not really anything you need to worry too much about. But that's it. So get it installed. That's the deal. Then we need to start looking at some of these options. And if you remember from the configuration, that is where the options live. But I think I do make a mention of it somewhere around here. Oh, no, I just said dhcpd.conf. So, anyhow, let's take a look at that file. Let's see dhcp dhcp.d.conf. Oh, dhcpd.conf. Okay. So, let's take a look at what I'm saying here. So, comment out option domain name and option domain name servers, global options. So there are two types of options that we're looking at in this particular file. Global options, which have no subnet declaration inside of them, or have no subnet declaration that includes them. So look at this here. Option domain name and option domain name servers, they're just floating out there, right? They are just out there. And in this case, what we want to do is stop that. We do not want example.org in this case, or the DNS servers ns1 and ns2.example.org to be given to any of our clients. We don't. So the only way to change that is to literally comment that out. So the comment, remember, is a hash mark. So all you need to do is just go in and stick a hash mark at the front of those, and that will take care of it. The reason that you want this, if you have more than one subnet. So imagine you don't want a Windows DHCP server and an Ubuntu DHCP server. You just want one, and you want both networks to feed off of that one. You might want a different domain name for each. And if that's the case, you don't want the global options set here. You want them in the subnet declaration. So long story short, these options can live in the subnet declaration that we're about to touch. And that's where we're going to want to set them. So for now, we will DHCP. Oop. I keep doing .d because there's a bunch of other configurations that live in .d. So it just anytime I see D, it's like always messes with me. So come down here, throw a hash mark in front of those, and then we will go redefine those a little bit later. We need the domain name servers now, and then we will go as we create DNS for ourselves. We will go add the domain name option DHCPD then. So for now, we just need to recreate one of these options. Now keep in mind, I'm asking you guys to set the default lease times. Those are, if you're watching, right here. Default lease time, max lease time. So those are the ones that we are going to want to change. Now here's the deal. Those are in seconds. 600, 7200, those are in seconds. So if you want 1 day, here's your word problem of the day. How many seconds are in 1 day? So, I mean, I guess you could just Google it. So, there's that. But take that and stick that in here. It's like 80,000 or something like that. Something. So, because I want you to do that math and figure out what that number actually is, I'm just going to stick 80,000 in here and call it a day. Now, down at the bottom. Don't worry about dynamic updates. I mean, we don't have them, so it's set to none, so that really doesn't do anything. So you want to scroll all the way down to the bottom? All the way down to the bottom, so you can't scroll down anymore. But what I want you to see is on the way down, I'm going to scroll up a little bit, just so we can see there was one. There it is. So look at the... Let's see if I can move this over a little bit so you can see my mouse a little bit better. This is a pretty decent subnet declaration that has pretty much all of the things that we would want. I'm going to caution you against just uncommenting this and repurposing it. You are going to want to just create a whole new one down at the bottom. Now, for reference, back over here, it's got the same basic stuff, right? The IP addresses might be a little different, but that's not really the It's not really what we're after. So, yeah, right here. So these options are set globally, like we were talking about before. So in our case, we want these options inside the subnet declaration. If you define them globally, outside of the ones that I explicitly told you not to do, I won't count off, but it's way easier to read if you just put everything under the single subnet. So, and again, when you run into that situation where you want a second subnet, you won't have to redo the entire thing. So, define everything within a subnet. What do you mean by that? So let's put a subnet together, or the subnet declaration together, and we'll actually talk about that. So, what you want, type in the word subnet, then the actual network address. 200.0 net mask. And then you want space, open curly bracket. So usually what I do in this case is enter, close curly bracket. This way, I can just start adding my options underneath. So you can, as it's noted here, and we kind of have to. Let me see. Let me make sure I did that. I did that right? No. See, I was just talking and forgot. So. Oh, no. It was the, okay, now I'm a little scatterbrained. So anyway, that should be fine. You can leave that there. What we're looking for are these options. It was the option domain name server that I was commenting out. So anyway, scratch the last 15-ish seconds. So anyway, you obviously don't need the option subnet mask because it's defined right above. But for completeness sake, option subnet mask. And you can just follow along. There are two spaces. The one thing that ISC DHCP wants is it to be consistent. So if you use a tab to scooch over those options, so notice subnet is flush to the left-hand side and an option is not, that's two spaces. And I am using the examples above. So notice here where my cursor is pool, and then space, there's allow. That is essentially the tab. That's what I'm doing here. I'm just doing it the way that or not really that it expects, but it's how the examples are, so I try not to stray too far away from those. Anyway, so option subnet mask, got that down. Again, you don't need broadcast address. You really just need what I'm asking for in the lab. But for completeness sake. And that'll be whatever the broadcast address is. Yep, pretty sure. And I'm already making typos. Look at that. I need semicolons at the end of each of these. And just kind of work your way down the list. Option, routers. What is your router's IP address? And option, domain name servers. And that is also .1. And then down at the bottom, you can see how to set up the range. So range 172.16.200. Mine was 100 to 199, I believe. I believe. I'll go in and check that here in just a minute. You can have multiple ranges, as you can see in the example up there. They've got 10 to 100 and then 150 to 200. So obviously everything from 101 to 149 is not going to be used in their scenario. But in ours, I don't really care how big your range is, so long as it's a range. Like 5, 10 IP addresses is enough. I've got 100, obviously, so it's kind of up to you how big you want that range. But again, just do not overlap with the first 5 IP addresses. 1 through 5 off limits. We're using those. All right. So save this bad boy. Hope you didn't make a typo, and get out of here. Now, one of the things that you can do before you ever get into anything else is to really just check yourself on typos. Anytime you make a change in a configuration file in Linux, the service needs to be restarted for those changes to take effect. So just by saving that file, nothing happens, other than the file getting saved, obviously. If you want DHCP to behave with those new settings, you have to restart it. So to restart, I think DHCP, I'm just going to use tab to, yep. So sudo system control restart ISC DHCP server. Now, if I made a typo, and I honestly kind of assume that I did, this will tell me about it. Oh, maybe. How do I know? Status. Okay, it's actually running. Look at those last few things. It says wrote 0 leases to the file, so obviously nothing's grabbing IP addresses just yet. Listening on my interface, ENP0S3, sending on ENP0S3, and that's pretty much it. So, if you see active running in the top, in green like I do, there's a good chance you did it right. But there are some little small things that may still be wrong, right? Like as in your, you typoed your range. So the server itself sees a range, and it's going to hand out IP addresses from that range. But if it starts, handing out .3, that's in the reserved IP addresses that we don't want to hand out. So maybe you just typoed 3 for 30 or something like that. So there are still things that can crop up that are wrong, just not that the system can see. It doesn't know how exactly it is that you want to deal with any of this stuff. So anyhow, that's the deal. Anyhow, so what you really want to get at this point is to test. You want to test this stuff. And the way to do that is start yourself up another VM, Linux Mint in this case. You can test with Windows if you like, but I'm pretty sure I'm asking you guys for, yeah, an MCLI dev show out of Linux Mint. So you can test with Windows, but you're going to need to get your screenshots out of Linux Mint. So let's do that. Where is, there it is. Turns out I don't have a Linux Mint. So let's make one. Obviously. Oh no, 10 is too small. So let's get rid of that. Try that one more time with a bigger hard disk. Go hang out with Mama. All right. Next minute. There we go. All right, get the network configured right. That's got to be internal network. All right, my daughter just popped in for a sec, so I'm trying to grab my bearings again. Anyway, so keep on keeping on with the Linux Mint thing. All right, so here's the deal. I've got two DHCP servers running at the same time. I have no idea which DHCP server is going to service Linux Mint. We will find that out here in just a minute. I need you guys to go in and install Linux Mint. So kind of a do as I say, not as I do kind of situation. So because in the interest of time, I don't want to keep you guys sitting here waiting for me to finish installing Linux Mint. So I'm just going to use it live, as in just like this. Oh, you got to do it through here. So if you want, you can change the resolution through here. Give me a little bit more room. All right. So if I do IPCA, I do have an IP address. Actually, since I'm, well, I don't know that. I don't know that. So anyway, the only way to actually figure out which DHCP server you're using is to go check the leases. So I'm going to kill two birds with one stone here. I'm going to head into pfSense so I can turn off the DHCP server. And while I'm there, I'll check the leases. So 16.200.1. Cool. DHCP server. And there we are. So it's enabled. Before I do that, we can come into status, DHCP leases, and figure out. Yep. There we go. So pfSense 1 on this one. So when we kill this DHCP server, what we're going to want to do is just restart the service. So that, restart the networking service so that we can get a new lease. Probably the same IP address, though. All right, so DHCP server. Disable that. Right? Changes have been applied. Should be good. The DHCP server is dead. However, that will not kill our current IP address. So the DHCP server can revoke IP addresses, but when you turn it off, it doesn't. So that does mean that we get to keep our IP address. It doesn't actually change. So what we need to do is, let's just disable networking here. There's a couple of ways that you can do this. Since we're in a GUI, it seems a little bit easier to do it this way. So give that a couple of seconds. Bring that back up. And I don't even know that this is going to work. We're going to find out. Okay, so we got ourselves an IP address, or we still have an IP address. So let's go check on the server itself. So I've got it listed here, var lib dhcp dhcpd.leases. So let's go take a look at that particular file. Cat var lib dhcp dhcpd.leases, if I can spell it right. There we go. Client hostname Mint, and right there. You can see all of the information about it. So the lease is the IP address. Starts and ends is 80,000 seconds, right? However that much is. And then hardware Ethernet. This is the way that you can actually verify that even if two computers have the same host name, they will have a different MAC address. So you can take a look at that MAC address and match it up with the machine that you're dealing with. So, well, actually, here, let's do it as you would normally do it. Right here. So the last 6 are the most important, 57, 53, 17, and then you can match that up, 57, 53, 17. That is the right machine. So there you go. Long story short, all of the things on this network will now just auto-generate an IP address as long as they ask for one. If you get caught in pfSense, just as I did here, uncheck that box, give it a couple seconds, and then check that box again. That's pretty much it. That's everything that I'm asking for. In MCLI Dev Show, just run that command, and it will show you all of the goodies that you need. You might need to make the window a little bigger so you can fit everything on the screen. But you can see IP address, you can see gateway, and you can see DNS. And you can actually test out and find out if everything is working properly by hitting up a website of some kind. I always go here because there's always like a gajillion images. It's pretty much like the whole website is just images. So really give the browser, the VM, and everything else in between a workout. But that's it. That's it. Getting DHCP set up on an Ubuntu server. That's it. Oh yeah, and then do ourselves a date command down there at the bottom, so I can verify when wins win. That's it. Cool. Well, I'll kill it here.